Hi, it's Matthew Lamprose. It's good to be with you again. I have the unique opportunity to get to talk to you today about the art of persuasion. I'm going to start this conversation talking about the elephant in the room, and I personally also believe that it's a bit of an elephant, and that is that sometimes people think, and I think rightly so, that to persuade someone is to try to fool them or to try to talk them into doing something that isn't in their best interests. If you go and search on the internet for advice about how to persuade people, often they tell you to mask your interests, to keep your cards close. They tell you to mimic the behavior of the person in front of you, and other things like that. Many of the books written about persuasion also talk about things like that. That stuff gets under my skin, and so while I'm being asked to talk about this, you have to know from the beginning that I don't believe that that's persuasion that is effective or helpful. I do believe in the art of persuasion and the science of persuasion, and I know that there is a definite and specific way to persuade people, but I believe it's based on honesty and specifically on taking a stance as an expert in your subject matter and leading people down the path of helping them make a good decision. So that's what we're going to talk about today, the art of persuasion, done in an ethical way and done in a way that will get you more business. So keep in mind, of course, the better you are at persuading people, the better you are at closing deals. So let me do my second major point here by saying that here at my company, we've done a ton of research. We've been at this now for 15 years. 7 of those, we've been specifically studying the behaviors of exceptional salespeople. And I describe what it takes to be good at sales in this way. It really comes down to 2 things. Those 2 things are, you have to be really, really good at collecting information. So you have to be able to get information from the client. You need to be able to meet with them in the first place so you can collect information. You need to build your relationship so that you can ask the kinds of questions that you need to ask. You need to qualify, overcome objections, be good at asking questions. All the things that make you good at collecting data. What's the situation that the client finds themselves in? And that takes digging and that takes skill, but it all sums up into the idea of collecting. The other thing that you need to be good at is crafting a solution or creating a solution. So you need to be able to take all of the information that you did when you were collecting information, combine it with all the knowledge you have about your product and about best practices and how one would go about solving the kinds of problems that you've learned about, and turn it into a package that the client will buy. So that means you've got to be good at presenting. That means you have to be good at having presence, overcoming objections, knowing your product, knowing financials, knowing the customer. But importantly, it also means you have to be really good at persuasion. And where persuasion comes in very handy, when you think of a salesperson who's brilliant, they're brilliant at these 2 things. In fact, if you sort of draw it as a chart, and sort of make the y-axis create and the x-axis craft, or capture and craft, what you'll find is that people that are in the bottom left aren't good at collecting or capturing data at all, and they're not good at crafting, and those are people that shouldn't be in sales. If you're in the top left up here, these are people that have really strong relationships. People love them, but they don't really know how to turn that into a sell. And so those are people that need to learn skills in terms of persuasion and presenting and crafting a story. People on the bottom right are really good at indicating to a client how they ought to do things, but really bad at knowing if the client needs them. And these are kind of usually schmarmy salespeople that are, don't ever take the time to listen. They can also be engineer types that they're not there to to collect information. They're just to craft a solution. If you want to be really good at sales, though, you should be in the top right. And that means that you're really good at collecting information, and it means that you're really good at creating or crafting a solution. So top right salespeople must be good at the art of persuasion. And if you're good at the art of persuasion after you've done a really good job collecting, then what you're doing is increasing your close rate in your funnel. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? first you have to collect a lot of information. First you have to get them to meet with you. First you have to build a relationship. You have to ask good questions. You have to know how to hold a good meeting and do all of the verifications and check for all the things that you need to check for. You need to make sure that anyone who should meet with you will, that all the right questions are asked, that all the objections are uncovered. Once you've done that, it becomes very important for you to be able to persuade people. For you to say, look, I have all the information and here's a potential solution, and you need to persuade them. Now, if you do persuasion before collect, then you're being, I think, unethical. If you do persuasion after, then I think you're being a consultative salesperson. Okay, so there's a great book, one of my favorites. In fact, it's actually been out maybe almost a decade, maybe not quite, but close, by a wonderful author named Jeffrey Thule. And the name of it is Exceptional Selling. And in this very good book, which I recommend as a great read, Jeffrey Thule talks about something he calls the quality decision process. And what he says, and I completely agree with, is that your clients have no sense for how to make a decision about what you sell. So let's stop for a minute and let's just think about your typical client. So what are they good at making decisions about? Well, they're really good about making decisions about shifts, when to put people on during shifts. They're really good about making decisions about what kind of maybe manufacturing equipment they need, or they're certainly probably pretty good about who to hire and who to not hire. They're good about their payroll stuff and their invoices and receivables and their accounting. They probably have a really good sense about their product and who ought to use their product. They have a really good idea about how to choose a brand and what they feel like is part of their story. They probably know a lot of things like that, but one thing I guarantee you they don't know how to do is make a decision about whether or not they ought to look to somebody to help them with their heating and air conditioning. They have no way to know that. Does that make sense? How in the world would you expect your client to have any concept about how they could efficiently and within a quality way make a really good decision about whether or not to outsource heating and air conditioning maintenance or projects? There's just no way for them to know that. And so the idea here is that if you're going to work with a client and be good at persuasion, what you really need to do is you need to be good at helping them understand how to make a decision about whether or not to use somebody to do their HVAC maintenance or whether or not to do a project with your company. Again, keeping in mind, you're the only one in the room that knows how to make that decision. They have no way to know that. Okay, so let's start with talking about how somebody would know whether or not to make a decision to use your company. And so let's just sort of spend a few minutes now. I'm going to give you kind of my guess, but really this has a lot to do with your expertise. One of the most important things you ought to be able to answer as a salesperson is, how would somebody know if they should use me? How would somebody make this decision? I might be beating a dead horse here, but it's really important to understand this is the last thing they know how to do. And if you leave it in their hands and you don't guide them and you don't help them understand how to make this decision, then you're basically asking them to make a bad decision, because they have no idea how to make this decision. So they'll do it by gut, or they'll just say, hey, it's not a priority right now, or they'll say, we just don't think it's that important, or it doesn't sound like enough money, or it's too expensive. And the reason they're saying all those things is because they have no other way to decide. So you need to kind of be unbiased here, and you need to be able to say, there is a time when you would say no, and there is a time when you say yes. Here's how you would know if you should say no or yes. And so it might be things like the average monthly electricity bill. It might be things like the importance of a very clean hygiene environment. It might be things like the importance of a very high-end, highly available heating and cooling system, because it's a data center or because it's a manufacturing center where the heating and air conditioning services are a critical part of the backbone of the system. So maybe there's sort of this first step that says, here's how you know if you should at least look at it. And it's if you're spending this much per month on electricity, or if it's you can show that this is very critical because it requires that it be very clean for a medical office, or sterile, or if you are talking about for a data center where it's critical. So that's sort of the first step. And then you would say, okay, then the next thing you want to do is you want to take a look at the environment that you're in. So if you're near the ocean, there's salt water, big problem. If you're near factories where they're bellowing out smoke, there can be a lot of contagions in the air, blah, blah, blah. If you're in an area that has a lot of rain, or if you're in and I don't know what these issues are. You know them certainly much better than me, but you need to then say, okay, so how important is it? What's my level of potential risk because of the environment I'm in, or because of the age of the units, or because of the placement of the units? And then you want to maybe take a look at the last thing, which is what are the financial ramifications? And again, I'm just guessing here, but what are the financial ramifications if the system stops working? And maybe this is somewhat similar to that first step, but let's put some dollars and cents behind what it would mean if the unit went out. Or maybe it's there's these added bonuses. So for the third step, we're looking for the and by the ways. So and by the ways, no more heaters under the desk. Or and by the way, you have a partner now that can make sure that this can get fixed right away. Or and by the way, we can lower the risk of you having a major capex expenditure by doing maintenance in a way that probably will lower your risk 60%. So maybe it's those things. And again, you have to be the expert at this, but you ought to, if you should be good at anything in your job, you ought to be able to tell anybody how they should know if they should use your services or not. So that's kind of my run at that, right? But you got to get good at that, okay? So that's what we'll call your quality decision process. So one of the first things you would probably want to do if you're doing the maintenance cell after the verification meeting, or maybe even during the pie chart meeting, is talk about how one would know if they should make this decision. So you kind of set the stage. We're going to go look. Here's the things we're going to be looking for. If we see these things, then we need to investigate this further. And if we don't, then probably you're going to be okay and you shouldn't look at a maintenance contract. Or for a project deal, maybe you have some things that they ought to look at, like the number of years somebody's been in business, or how risky the job is. Is this sort of a standard job, or kind of a risky job that's going to require one-off stuff? And again, I don't know what they are, but you ought to set the stage. Here's how, if I were you, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, this is how I would make the decision. And once you get them there, then you both kind of have this roadmap for how you're going to make a decision. Okay, so then once you've done that, what you need to do is you need to go measure where they are on each one of these quality decision processes. And then, of course, you're going to begin to persuade. So set the stage to help them understand what the quality decision process is, measure everything, to help them understand, wow, in order to make a good decision, you have to look this way, and it looks like you ought to buy from us, or not. But those are the steps that you go through in order to persuade using the quality decision process. So quality decision process, step one in being good at the art of persuasion. And frankly, even though we're only about 15 minutes into this, it's actually the single most important thing. And if you want to be really good at persuasion, you can hit pause now, go write out how one would make a decision, your quality decision process, learn how to talk about that in a way that gets people to understand you, and you'll be very persuasive. Again, persuasion happens once you've collected information, right? So now you can say, here's the information, let's put it through the quality decision process so you can close the deal. But you're going to be great at that if you can do just this one thing and nothing else. Okay, I'm going to move on to two other things. And I would say these are sort of higher level thoughts. They're more like mastery level kinds of thinking that have to do with the art of persuasion. They're not necessarily something that you have to do, but they're something to think about. And 80-90% of the solution for persuasion is the quality decision process. But these are some other things that might make you even better. Okay, so I'm going to cover what they are. The first one is what we call dollarization. One of my favorite authors is a gentleman named Jeffrey J. Fox, and he's written a whole series of books, each of which I would recommend because they're just good books. He did, though, at one point write a very academic kind of business strategy book that's called The Dollarization Principle. And he came up with, I believe, the word dollarize, because I don't think the spell checker ever recognizes it. So I'm pretty sure that's his own word. He has a sales motto, and his sales motto is early to bed, early to rise, sell hard, and dollarize. I like that. What he's basically saying is one of the key things, like just early to bed, early to rise, is to dollarize. So in this book, he goes through how to do this. It's a very simple concept. But the book is a great read if you really want to know in detail how you might do something like this. It's probably something you might recommend to your marketing team if you have one at your franchise, because they can create some pretty cool product literature for you that uses dollarization. So here's the way to think about it, though, if you just think about it very simply. And it is this. In the absence of any other financial data, the only financial data the customer has when they're making a decision is cost. Remember that a customer, a prospect, will make a decision based on dollars and cents. In fact, the major reason that decisions are now more and more made by committee, more and more made by the CFO, more and more made by several people, well, I'll talk to my boss and I'll get back to you, has to do with the fact that they're trying to get the emotion out of this decision and just look at the dollars and cents. So the language of business is dollars and cents. That's what they speak in. Everything about a business is money. Everything about a human is emotion. So when you're selling to consumers, it's fine to talk about emotion. When you're selling to businesses, I understand, I get it. The emotion comes in and you want to talk about that, and you want to talk about value and benefits. But at the end of the day, that has to somehow be translated to dollars and cents, because if you can't translate a benefit, a feature, a value into something that translates into a positive dollar and cent impact, when they make a decision, their only data they're going to have are costs. So they'll have all these negative numbers and no positive numbers. They'll say it's going to cost us $3,000 and we'll sleep better at night. And they just have to think to themselves, is it worth $3,000? It's much, much better if you can find a way to take all of your features and benefits and turn them into dollars and cents. So instead of them saying, is $3,000 worth sleeping better at night, you can help them figure out exactly what that benefit means to them. And they'll say, well, it's going to cost us $3,000, but we figured it gives us $4,500 in value. We'd be crazy not to do this. Part of being persuasive is speaking the language of business. Let me make another point about this. When human beings make money, when you and I make money, the reason we make money is to spend it, right? We're making money so that we can spend it. The reason businesses make money is to keep it. They want to keep the money that they make. So it's very different. When you ask a business to spend money, it's like you're taking away all of their hard work, because that's why they exist. If you ask you and I to spend money, we're glad to do it because we get an experience, or we get something cool, or it's fun, or we get a great dinner. Businesses hate spending money at the end of the day. They're in business to make money, not to spend it. And so we have to be very careful that we don't put them in a position where all they're thinking about is spending money. So again, the idea of dollarization, and the book by Jeffrey J. Fox, I would recommend if you want to dig into this deeper, is the idea that you should put everything in dollars and cents. Not that everything has to end up in dollars and cents and you don't talk about features and benefits, but in the absence of any other data, the only financial data they're going to have is cost, which is a negative. So you got to give them some positives. So quality decision process is the major thing you can do to be good at persuasion. Another really helpful thing is to figure out how to put this in dollars and cents. Because once you've established that in dollars and cents, then it's just a simple math problem. And the ability to make the decision becomes much easier. All right, 2 more mastery level thoughts, and then we'll close up. So the second idea that has to do with persuasion is, again, it's a higher level thought, and it's a great technique to know, but it pales in comparison to being able to do the quality decision process. But it's what we call the bridge to change. And Jeffrey Thull talks about this in some of his other books. He calls it something different, but I call it the bridge to change. And here's the basic concept. When somebody buys, they're making a decision to change. Buying is a decision to change. And if you've ever thought about that in that way, you'll understand that getting someone to change is difficult. There's all kinds of problems with getting someone to change, including anxieties and fears and risks and hassles and all these other things. If you can't overcome someone's concern about change, then they're not going to buy from you. So here's how that works. When somebody looks at a problem like their heating and air conditioning system, they're somewhere on this spectrum, from completely unaware that it's a problem and what it means, to in a state of crisis about this problem. So you kind of move from unaware about the problem to aware, I know it's a problem, to concerned, this is a problem and I'm a little bothered by it, to crisis. This is a problem and we got to do something about it. And as you can naturally see by looking at this spectrum, the further to the right you move, the more likely you are to buy. There are a lot of people that have heating and air conditioning issues that they ought to be in crisis about, but aren't. And your job is to move them along this spectrum. So part of doing the verification meeting, or part of competing with the competitor, or part of doing the quality decision process work with them, is going to have to be getting them to move from wherever they are, and likely it's unaware, to the point where they're in a state of crisis. And I recommend doing these on each of the individual components of the quality decision process. So it's not just being unaware that a maintenance program can really make your facility lower risk for CapEx costs and making them in a state of crisis about that, but it's each individual thing. So it's understanding, wow, the air conditioning system in my medical office represents a significant risk to mold. And I can do everything I want to keep my hands washed and the facility sterile, but if I don't maintain my heating and air conditioning system, I could put that all at risk. And I could move from completely unaware about that to in a state of crisis where I've got to do something. And what you do is you take your elements of your quality decision process and you work every single one of those until you get to the point where that person says, you know what, I have the quality decision process, I've thought about this, and I'm worried about each of these elements, and we need to do something. And at that point, you've done a very good job persuading. As you can see, persuading is much more about a formula for making a decision and gathering data and helping them to see things in a new light than it is necessarily about being a good presenter or knowing how to do spin selling, where you mimic their behavior. Okay? So keep in mind that every person has to understand where they are, and they have to care a lot about it to the point where they're in a state of crisis. And just because they now know that they have 8 air conditioning units on the roof that are all dirty, or that they're coated in salt water, or there's mold growing everywhere, doesn't necessarily mean that they are concerned or in a state of crisis. So you have to get them there. And that is the art of selling and the art of persuasion, is getting them to get why that's a problem. And so that's where case studies come in, and that's where, of course, having a reference customer to talk to them about the problem. That's where doing some dollarization comes in. That's where talking about what could happen. Maybe you wear a white shirt whenever you do one of these inspections, and they see you in a white shirt, and when you come back, it's filthy dirty. And they are immediately persuaded that it is a lot dirtier up there than they think. And if you did that at a medical office, I think that would be highly persuasive that their units are not as clean as they thought they were, and therefore they ought to be concerned about that. Okay, so that's the second kind of higher level thought about persuasion. And the final thought is a simple thought, but it requires you being very specific about the way you sell to people. And that is this. When you give to somebody a price, the cost of doing business with you, There's four things they're thinking about. So they're thinking about the cost, the price. What are they saying it's going to cost me? But they're also thinking about risk and hassle and whether or not they trust you. So the way it works is this: price equals cost plus risk plus hassle minus trust. That's the formula for when you say, hey, it's $1. They're thinking, he said it was $1 and I could lose my job, $80,000 a year, and it will take me 2 months of time to do all of this, and that's $30,000. And I don't really trust this person. So I'll mark them a negative 100. So now this process that I thought was $1 is actually $150,000, $130,000, $100,000, because it has high risk and high hassle, and I don't trust you. So when you have people that you're trying to work with, persuade to buy, they're stalling, or they start to go radio silent on you, or you're constantly priority number 5 on their top 3 priority list, one of the most important things you can do is start to try to understand how they perceive the risk of this and how they perceive the hassle of this and whether or not they trust you. Because it almost certainly is about one of those things. By the way, you ought to be very aware of what the risks of doing business with you are. And you're going to be in love with your company and gung-ho and say we're the greatest company in the world and think that, oh, we're not risky at all. But come on, get real. You know that whether it's a perceived risk or a real risk, there is a risk of doing business with you. And so you should understand what those things are. And the reason you need to understand what they are and actually be real about it is so that you can overcome them. So, one of the risks of doing business with you is that right now, yeah, the air conditioning units are dirty, and they could have this huge CapEx cost, but so far, I've never had to do that. So you almost represent to me a guaranteed loss, because I'm not spending this money on maintenance now. It's $1,500 a year, and yes, I might save $20,000 from a CapEx problem, but I haven't ever had to spend that yet. So you represent to me a risk of $1,500 a year. You got to understand that, and then you got to be able to overcome that. You also need to understand the hassle factor. Because for some people, particularly if this is not their job, they just don't want another project right now. And they like what you have to say, and they like you, and they understand this. But look, at the end of the day, I don't have the time to involve you and do the contracts, and my lawyer's going to have to want to look at this, because in our company, and nothing ever happens without the lawyers looking at this. And I got to go to my boss, and this just isn't something I want to bring up right now, because I just had my annual review, and I didn't do so hot. You got to get what those hassles potentially are, and you got to be realistic about them and understand that they exist so that you can overcome them. And then you need to understand whether or not people trust you and how that works. At the end of the day, though, the most important thing you can have are tools to overcome risk, hassle, and trust. So what can you do to get someone to trust you more? Well, you can have lots of success stories. You can drop the names of their neighbors. You can have somebody come by with you. You could bring the president of your company or your sales VP along. You can take them golfing. There are a lot of things that you can think of. If I just asked you to stop and think of 10 things, you probably could write them down. Keep those in your toolkit. When you realize that maybe trust isn't there, use some of them, because that will lower your overall price, because they'll trust you. Then the same thing for hassle and risk. What can you do to overcome hassle? Can you tell them we'll just take your contract? Can you tell them we'll give you a 90-day guarantee, money-back guarantee, trial period? Can you tell them that? Can you show them how you have a project manager that's going to work all the details? They don't need to worry about it. If they'll just set a 30-minute phone call with you every 2 weeks, then you'll be able to update them on the status of your project, and they won't have to worry about it. Or for maintenance, I'll drop on your desk every 6 months just a report, and it will take you 5 minutes to read. And so basically what I'm talking about is lowering your risk and giving you these great things, and it will take you 10 minutes a year. I don't know what they are, but think of things, write down 10 things you can do to overcome hassle. And then the last thing is to overcome risk. And you got to, again, be realistic. You can't be too salesy and just think you're the best thing in the world. You got to be realistic that they're going to sense risk. And so what are those things, and what's in your toolkit? Well, customer referrals, trials, testimonials, extending credit. You got to kind of write down involving the president, involving the Better Business Bureau, think of the things that you can do that will help them lower risk, and then employ them when you need to, based on where you sense that this customer is going. You can be very, very persuasive, and you can have done everything right. If they sense a lot of risk or a lot of hassle in doing business with you, then it's going to be hard to get this person to close. Signs that someone is sensing risk and hassle and trust issues that they're not talking about will be that they're blowing you off for meetings, or that they'll say next quarter, next quarter, next quarter after you've gotten pretty far with them, or that they just don't respond anymore, or that they said, it's the contract sitting in front of our lawyer and we'll get back to you. If they're giving you kind of the blow off, it's almost certainly about risk, hassle, or trust. If you've gotten through the point where you've done a good quality decision process and maybe have dollarized, and this is an obvious decision that they ought to do, it's actually more expensive than you thought it was, because they're including the price of the risk they feel. Okay? So, at the end of the day, what I would say is being persuasive has everything to do with being a leader, and being a thought leader and an expert in your industry about your product. You ought to be able to tell anyone you talk to how to make a decision about using you. If you can do that, if you can tell them a good, amazingly simple and powerful and easy to figure out process for how they would make the decision, keeping in mind that the decision might be no, and being open to that, then that's very persuasive, because it gives somebody a way to make a decision they didn't have that before. And, by the way, if you're in a competitive situation, part of your quality decision process ought to hinge on some of the things you're better at than your competitor, because that helps them. Then you're the one that gave them the decision process. Your competitor didn't. They didn't offer anything but product and price. And they start to look at some of these things, and they start making the decision that you're the better fit because of the criteria you've given them. It has to be real criteria, but why not sway some of it your way by helping them understand how they ought to make this decision? Like, do they have enough trucks? Is it 24/7? Is it guaranteed? Do you own the equipment or do I? Things that you're better at than your competitors. The second thing is to look at dollarization, right? Be really good at that. The third thing is to remember this bridge to change. Understand that you've got to move people along the point in each of these decision criteria. So just because they understand that they've got dirty units, or that you're 10% cheaper, doesn't mean that they've gotten to the point where they care about that. So methodically, on paper, write down what the quality decision steps are and try to figure out where they are on them. And I promise you, it won't be so hard to figure out if you just say, it's pretty obvious. They don't get that mold could cause a real problem for their medical center. And then if you just work on that with them, they'll be at the decision point, and you have persuaded them artistically. So you are now a master persuader. And then the final thing is that you got to remember that price equals cost plus risk plus hassle minus trust. If you remember that, then when things start to get stuck, the way to persuade somebody out of a stuck deal, what I call a log jam, is to focus on those things. Remember that to be persuasive is a good thing, and what it really is, again, about leadership, decision leadership, how to make decisions, how to make wise choices. And as you show people how to do that, you'll make their businesses a lot better. You'll make more money, you'll close more deals, and it will be a lot of fun. Good luck out there. Always contact me if I can add any follow-up, or if you have questions, or the book you want me to recommend, or you want me to listen to what your quality decision process items are, or you want me to listen to you make phone calls. I'm very happy to do that. You guys are a fantastic client, and I'd do anything for you. So here's my email and phone number information up here. And please contact me if you need anything. Thanks, you guys, for the business. It's great doing business with you. Thanks to William Kroll, as always, for this opportunity. I hope you guys will take the opportunity to thank him for all the work he does for you guys, and make sure that you go and ask him about the video archives, because there's 30, 40, 50, 100 of these videos out there that can be helpful to you as you're trying to learn the link process and close more deals. Take good care.